The White House press briefing room was packed, the air thick with tension. Karoline Leavitt, the sharp and unflinching press secretary under President Donald Trump, stood behind the podium. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters from major networks sat poised, ready to challenge her. At precisely noon, she adjusted the microphone and scanned the room with piercing eyes. The golden presidential seal behind her gleamed under the bright lights, a silent symbol of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us," she began, her voice unwavering. "The president has made it clear that transparency is key, and I'm here to ensure that happens. We'll take your questions now." A journalist from a well-known liberal news outlet shot his hand up. "Karoline, can you confirm reports that President Trump's recent policy on border security is a blatant attack on immigrants?" The question was aggressive, loaded with accusation rather than inquiry. Karoline's lips curled slightly, her composure intact. "Let's correct the record before misinformation spreads. The president's policy is about protecting Americans, securing our borders, and upholding the law. If you call that an attack, I'd suggest you reread the Constitution." A low murmur rippled through the room. The journalist, taken aback, quickly followed up. "But this administration has been accused of racism by several organizations." Karoline raised her hand, silencing him. "Accusations are not facts, sir. The president believes in legal immigration. The only people who should feel attacked are criminals trying to enter illegally." "Next question." Another reporter from a mainstream network jumped in. "Karoline, the administration's economic policies have been labeled a disaster by several economists. How do you respond to that criticism?" Karoline sighed, shaking her head slightly. "Labeled by whom?" "The same economists who said Trump's first presidency would destroy the economy, yet he delivered record-breaking job growth? The same people who ignored inflation under the previous administration. Let's stick to reality. Under President Trump, we've seen a resurgence of American manufacturing and job opportunities for the middle class." The room was getting restless, but Karoline wasn't done. Just then, a voice from the back cut through the chatter. "Miss Leavitt, will the president answer for his so-called authoritarian policies?" A hush fell over the room. This was the moment the press had been waiting for, the chance to corner her. Karoline smirked, her confidence radiating. "Authoritarian? You mean enforcing the law, ensuring free speech, and putting America first? If standing up for our country is authoritarian, then maybe the term has lost all meaning." Silence. Even the most vocal critics seemed momentarily stunned. And then, the doors at the back of the room swung open. A figure stepped inside. Donald J. Trump himself had arrived. A stunned silence gripped the room as Donald Trump strode confidently toward the podium. The air felt electric. Half the reporters seemed eager to pounce, while the other half looked like they had just seen a ghost. Karoline Leavitt stepped aside, a knowing smirk on her face. She had held the line, but now it was time for the main event. Trump adjusted the microphone, casually straightened his red tie, and scanned the room with his signature smirk. "Well, well, well. I see we have the usual suspects here today. Fake news is in the building, folks." A few chuckles rose from the audience, some genuine, some nervous. "Now, I wasn't planning on stopping by, but I was watching Karoline handle you guys, and let me tell you, she's doing a fantastic job. Better than all of you combined, I might add." He turned toward her. "Great job, Karoline." She nodded with a polite smile, arms crossed, knowing exactly what was about to happen. "But," Trump continued, looking back at the press, "I thought I'd come in and clear up some of the garbage you people are spewing. Because let's be honest, nobody trusts the mainstream media anymore. Nobody. And you know why? Because you lie. All the time. So let's set the record straight." A CNN reporter seized the moment, shooting up from his seat. "Mr. President, are you saying the media is the enemy of the people?" Trump leaned on the podium and shrugged. "I don't have to say it. The American people already know it." Gasps. Murmurs. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You see," he continued, "the media used to be about journalism. Now it's just activism. They don't report facts, they push narratives. And when you lie about me, about my administration, and about the American people, don't expect me to sit back and take it. The same reporter wasn't backing down. But Mr. President, under your administration, critics say democracy is at risk. Trump cut him off with a chuckle. Oh please, democracy is at risk. Who's censoring people on social media? Who's trying to arrest political opponents? It's not me, it's your friends in the establishment. And let me tell you, the American people see it. They see the hypocrisy. They see the corruption. And they are sick of it. Another hand shot up, this time from a journalist at a left-leaning news outlet. Mr. President, many believe your rhetoric is dangerous and divisive. Do you take responsibility for the division in this country? Trump leaned forward, his voice steady. Let me ask you something. Who burned down cities in 2020? Who called half the country deplorable? Who pushes identity politics, dividing people by race, gender, and anything else they can think of? It's not me. It's your side. So don't come in here lecturing me about division when you people thrive on it. More murmurs. A few exchanged nervous glances. Look, Trump continued, my only crime is putting America first. And if that upsets you, maybe you're in the wrong country. For the first time, the press corps sat in stunned silence. Then, a slow clap began from somewhere in the back of the room. The crowd turned. And that's when it happened, something no one expected. The slow clap echoed through the room, breaking the uneasy silence. All eyes darted toward the back. A young journalist, barely in his 30s, stood up from his seat. He wasn't from a major network. His press badge read, Independent News USA. His face was unreadable, but his hands continued clapping, steady and deliberate. The room tensed. No one had ever dared to openly applaud Trump in a press briefing. The president raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Well, looks like we've got someone here with a little common sense. What's your name, kid? The journalist hesitated for a moment before responding. Ethan Wallace, sir. Trump nodded. Ethan Wallace. All right, Ethan, since you're the only one here with the guts to think for yourself, I'll give you the next question. Go ahead. Ethan cleared his throat. Mr. President, the mainstream media constantly pushes narratives about you being a threat to democracy, yet they ignore government overreach, free speech suppression, and political weaponization. How do you plan to combat this and ensure that everyday Americans, who don't trust the media, can still get the truth? The entire press corps bristled. A few journalists scoffed. Someone muttered, "Plant question." Trump smirked. "Great question. See, this is what real journalism looks like, folks. You should take notes." He shot a glance at the usual reporters, who were furiously scribbling, perhaps more in frustration than analysis. Trump leaned on the podium. The truth is, we're fighting an uphill battle. Big tech, the media, and even parts of the government are against us. They don't want the people to think for themselves. They want control. But here's what we're doing, we're fighting back. We're building platforms that let Americans speak freely. We're exposing corruption. And most importantly, we're not backing down. Ethan nodded. So, are you saying the government needs to step in and regulate media bias? Trump shook his head. Not at all. Unlike the left, I believe in free speech. That includes speech I don't like. But what I don't believe in is propaganda disguised as journalism. The people deserve the truth. And trust me, they're getting smarter. They see through the lies. Suddenly, an MSNBC reporter interjected. Mr. President, are you admitting you want to control the media narrative? Trump scoffed. Oh, give me a break. You guys already control the media narrative. I'm just trying to break the monopoly. Let the American people decide what's true instead of being spoon-fed lies. The room erupted in crosstalk. Some reporters were angrily whispering among themselves. Others furiously typed on their laptops. Karoline Leavitt, still standing nearby, finally stepped forward. All right, I think we've addressed enough misinformation today. But Trump held up a hand. One more thing. The room quieted. You all love to act like you're the voice of the people, he said, scanning the press corps. But the truth is, the people don't trust you anymore. And after this election, You're going to see just how much they're done with your nonsense." The tension was thick. A few reporters gulped. Others clenched their jaws. Then, before anyone could fire back, Trump turned to Karoline. "Great job today. You handled these guys like a champ." She smirked. "Thank you, Mr. President." Trump gave one last glance at the press corps. "And to the rest of you, do better." And with that, he walked off. The room sat in stunned silence. But something had changed, and the liberal reporters knew it. The tide was turning. The moment Donald Trump walked out of the briefing room, the silence lingered like an aftershock. The usual aggressive follow-ups from the press didn't come. No last-minute shouts for clarification. No rushed questions tossed at Karoline Leavitt. The reporters looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. For years, they had controlled the narrative, cutting, twisting, and reshaping Trump's words to fit their headlines. But today, something felt different. Ethan Wallace, the independent journalist who had dared to applaud, sat back down. His phone buzzed furiously. He glanced at the screen. Hundreds of notifications flooded his feed. Clips of him clapping for Trump were already circulating online, accompanied by captions like, "Who is this journalist? The only honest one in the room. This guy just exposed the entire media in front of Trump. Independent press rising while mainstream collapses?" Meanwhile, across the room, the more established journalists huddled together. "This is bad," one muttered under his breath. "He made us look weak. He made us look dishonest," another corrected grimly. Karoline Leavitt, still at the podium, noticed the unease and decided to press forward. "Any more questions?" she asked, arms crossed. A journalist from the Washington Post hesitated before speaking. "Miss Leavitt, do you think today's briefing set a dangerous precedent? Encouraging hostility toward the press?" Karoline gave a dry laugh. "Hostility? You mean like the way you people treated us for years? Spinning stories, pushing false narratives, and smearing the president at every turn." The journalist opened his mouth to respond, but she wasn't done. The American people are tired of biased coverage. They're tired of being told what to think. Today, they saw something different, real, unfiltered truth. If that's dangerous to you, maybe that says more about your industry than it does about us. The tension was undeniable. Some reporters fidgeted, others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. But no one could deny the shift in the room's atmosphere. Then, from the back, a familiar voice cut through. Ethan Wallace again. "Miss Leavitt, do you believe independent journalists like myself are the future of political reporting?" She smiled. "I think anyone willing to report facts instead of pushing agendas is the future." "So yes, Ethan, I do." A murmur spread through the room. Some reporters shot him dirty looks. Others seemed to consider her words carefully. Karoline nodded toward the cameras. "That's all for today, folks." She turned and walked off, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The door swung shut behind her. For the first time in years, the White House press corps had been forced to reckon with a brutal truth. They were no longer in control of the narrative. And outside, in the world beyond the briefing room, America was watching. The fallout from the explosive press briefing spread like wildfire. Within minutes, social media was ablaze with clips of Trump dismantling the mainstream press, Karoline Leavitt's sharp retorts, and Ethan Wallace's unexpected moment in the spotlight. The media scrambles. Inside newsrooms at CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times, frantic meetings were called. Producers and editors huddled around screens, watching the footage over and over. "We need a counter-narrative," barked a senior CNN executive. "This can't be the story. We spin it, call it an authoritarian stunt. A war on journalism. But we can't ignore it." A younger journalist hesitated. "People saw it live. They saw how weak we looked. Then we make it about the dangers of populism," the executive insisted. "That always works." But even as they planned their damage control, the numbers told a different story. CNN's coverage of the press briefing was getting crushed in online engagement by independent commentators and citizen journalists. People weren't buying the usual spin. The rise of independent media. Meanwhile, Ethan Wallace sat in a coffee shop across town, staring at his phone. His inbox was flooded with interview requests, podcast invitations, and offers from independent media networks. A text from an unknown number appeared. "Ethan, you shook up the system today. America needs more voices like yours. Let's talk." T. Could it be? Before he could even process that, another notification popped up. His follower count had exploded overnight. Hundreds of thousands of people were now following him, calling him the last real journalist in America. For the first time in years, people weren't looking to legacy media for the truth. They were turning to those who had the courage to ask real questions. Karoline Leavitt's victory lap. At the White House, Karoline Leavitt stood in Trump's office, debriefing with the president. "You crushed it out there," Trump said, leaning back in his chair. "They didn't know what hit him." Karoline smiled. "They're losing control, Mr. President. For years, they dictated the narrative. Now, for the first time, the American people are seeing right through them." Trump nodded. "We keep this up, and by the next election, the media will be completely irrelevant." Karoline crossed her arms. "Maybe they already are." The president grinned. "I love it." The final blow. As the sun set over Washington, the liberal media scrambled to regain control. But it was too late. The briefing had exposed them in a way they never saw coming. By the next morning, polling data revealed a shocking trend. Trust in mainstream media had hit an all-time low. Meanwhile, independent journalists, alternative media networks, and even the president's direct communications were gaining unprecedented traction. The people had spoken. The media empire, once untouchable, was crumbling. And it had all started with one press briefing.